Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. This is Karthik Bappanad. I'm the center head of SciSec. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we begin, I request everyone to be on mute, please. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. You can, and we will. Yeah. We are also going to record this webinar, and the recording will be uploaded on the SciSec YouTube channel. So you can always refer back to the video later if necessary. This webinar is part of our Samgachadvam series that we started in March. The objective is to cover different topics of security over the course of this series. And just VAPT, malware, or forensics. Cybersecurity is complex, and it is important that we all appreciate the multiple facets of security. We want to provide a conceptual overview in this webinar to the various aspects of security to explore further. This is the 20th webinar in this. Of today's webinar is implication. Next week, we will be covering identity and access management. Managing identities is an extremely important aspect of security, and the webinar next week will provide you the details of what identity and access management is about, how it is key to ensure cybersecurity in an enterprise. We will open the registration for this for next week's webinar shortly. We have more webinars lined up over the next weeks, and I hope you will find this series of webinars useful. Do let us know if you have any feedback as well as any ideas to share with us. As usual, we will have an assessment made available at the end of the webinar. Those who successfully complete the assessment will be provided a certificate. The assessment will be kept open for 60 minutes after the completion of the webinar. The questions are from the topic covered during the webinar, so you should not have too much difficulty in cracking this assessment. Those who get 6 or more correct out of 10 questions today will be provided the certificate. At the end of the assessment, you will also be asked to provide feedback on the webinar. Please provide your genuine feedback, and rest assured the feedback will not have a bearing on the assessment. You need to have a Gmail ID to take this assessment. The certificate will be emailed to the Gmail ID you would have used to log into the assessment. Please give us a few days time for us to share the certificates with you. Would appreciate if you do not follow up in case the certificate is not shared in the next 1 or 2 days itself. However, when you log in, please make sure you provide your details accurately, because the certificate will be generated based on the details like email ID you would have provided at the time of taking the assessment. The link for the assessment will be shared at the end of the webinar. Also note that the assessment is open to only those who have participated in the webinar. It's my pleasure today to introduce my colleague Shika Pathak, who will be anchoring the 20th webinar of Samgachadvam series. May I again request everyone who is not speaking to go on mute, please. So Shika leads the cybersecurity awareness and skill building activities at SciSec. She is passionate about technology, tech policy, research, and public affairs. Shika has represented India in the Telenor Youth Summit in Oslo, Norway, to present an idea of a mobile application for women's safety. There, she also attended the Nobel Peace Prize Award ceremony. She was also a part of youth delegation at UN Youth Forum at Thailand. Prior to SciSec, Shikha was working with BIT, the cyber security subsidiary of Reserve Bank of India, in their research and innovation team. Now I will hand over to Shikha to take you through the rest of the webinar. Shikha, over to you.
Shikha Pagide.
Karthik, do you want to give me the host access?
Yeah, Karthik, before we begin, I think we should perhaps transfer the host access to Abbas. There's a lot of background noise.
Hello?
Yeah, just going through whoever is not muted and muting them. Yeah, Shikha, I think you can start.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karthik. I'll start by sharing my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, Shikha.
All right. Thanks a lot, Karthik, for the warm introduction. A very good evening, everyone. So it's my privilege today that I get to present before you, discussing about a very topical theme, a very current theme rather, on the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019. I say topical and relevant because as we speak, even as we speak, the bill is being deliberated upon by a joint parliamentary committee. So before I start with my presentation, let me give an introduction. We know that companies worldwide store and process huge volumes of data. Given India's population and the recent spurt towards digital India, user data being controlled and processed is in humongous volumes, and the existing legislations are not dynamic enough to address the challenges of data privacy. Of late, all of you would have read in newspapers of multiple data breaches occurring across the globe, and even in India. You would have heard about Zomato, Unacademy, Nykaa, and even security breaches impacting websites of central and state governments. So there is no doubt that there is a need to have a law for data privacy. Apart from that, it has become a very significant boardroom issue, significant enough to establish a law that would take care of consumers' data and protect their privacy. So let us begin with today's presentation. I would request all of you to please ensure that your mic is on mute, because it will make sure that there are no disturbances while we are discussing the bill. At the end of this presentation, when we have the Q&A session, we'll give everybody a chance to ask questions, to discuss further. Thank you so much for your cooperation. So let's start. Let us start first with the history of the data protection in India.
I'm going to show you how the best fit line works, and we're going to...
Yeah, when we talk about the history, we want to understand as to when was the first time that the question of privacy was raised in the Indian courts. While there were other judgments like Khadak Singh versus the state of Uttar Pradesh, which did raise the question of privacy, however, such discussions were not taken forward because there was no precedent, and privacy was by then not recognized as a constitutional right. It was, however, in 2016 that when the parliament passed the Aadhaar Act. The Aadhaar Act, as we all know, targeted delivery of financial and other subsidies and benefits, wanted to provide a unique authentication number for establishing identity of individuals and then giving them targeted delivery of subsidies. This very act also collected a lot of biometric data, a lot of data related to addresses, locations, because they wanted to establish citizens' identity and they needed proof of such identity. This was, however, challenged. A petition was filed against the constitutional validity of Aadhaar on the grounds that it violated the citizens' right to privacy. Petitioners challenged that Aadhaar had in itself become an instrument of transfer of sensitive personal data. So though later the Supreme Court finally upheld the constitutional validity of Aadhaar, it said that this involved parting with minimal information for larger public interest. But one question that actually came up, during this very important judgment was that whether the right to privacy was guaranteed under the Indian Constitution. And this was decided in the landmark judgment that was the Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India. In 2017, a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court declared that the right to privacy was a fundamental right, and it was declared so under Articles 14, 19, and 21. What is Article 21? Article 21 is privacy is protected as an intrinsic part of right to life and right to personal liberty. Also, it was guaranteed under the Part 3 of the Constitution, that is Article 14, right to equality, and Article 19, rights regarding freedom of speech, etc. So, the most important thing in this judgment was that it laid the foundations to firming up the rules and the regulations of data protection in the country. Let me first clarify something here. When I say that privacy became a fundamental right, we have to understand one thing. Fundamental rights are usually enforceable only against state actors. By state actors, I mean against government. They are not enforceable against non-state parties. So in this judgment, the court highlighted the need for a data protection law, which will ensure that there is protection even against non-state parties as well. So we are covering the background so far. Data Protection Bill of the Data Protection Bill 2019. We talked about the fundamental right in the K.S. Puttaswamy case. So soon after that, the Ministry of Information and Technology, it constituted the Justice Sri Krishna Committee to draft the Data Protection Bill 2018. The Government of India solicited comments from public, from various ministries, from key stakeholders, ranging from academia, ranging from industries, ranging from think tanks, to improvise upon the bill. And the result of all that is the revised Personal Data Protection Bill 2019, which was introduced in Lok Sabha. It is currently undergoing deliberations in the Joint Parliamentary Committee. See, right to privacy was a fundamental value which we have committed under multiple international laws. India is a party to multiple international laws, including Universal Declaration of Human Rights, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So it is but obvious that sooner or later we as a country had to harmonize our domestic laws with the international laws that we had committed to. So this is a step forward in that direction. In this slide, I am explaining the journey of a bill till it becomes a law. Like I have mentioned earlier, the current draft was introduced by Lok Sabha on 11th December 2019. It was referred to as soon enough, it was being deliberated by a joint parliamentary. It is actually an ad hoc body. It is set up for specific objective, for specific duration. So it has the power to collect evidences in oral and written form in connection with the reports. So what a joint committee does is it is going to consider the bill clause by clause, going to take representations from various bodies. You would have read in newspaper that I think day before Facebook made an oral representation regarding their concerns about the bill. Before that, there was National Investigation Agency, there was the National Crime Records Bureau, even ASSOCHAM, and multiple such industry bodies and think tanks have made their representations. And after all these deliberations, the committee submits a report to the House, which is voted upon, right? And if passed, it goes forward for the president's signature and finally becomes a law. So this is the journey of the bill till it becomes a law. So why do we need this bill? Currently, what are the legislations which are, prevalent, and why are we revamping? The reason being that the current legislations, there are two. One is the IT Act 2000, and the other one is the IT Rules 2011. And both of them, while there are novel attempts at data protection, however, they have their share of, you could say, inadequacies and flaws given the unprecedented pace of technological development we have seen of late. One of the major reasons which you can say is that this IT Act 2000 is applicable only on companies. It is not applicable on government. Further, these acts have a very narrow definition of what is sensitive data. So moving towards the Personal Data Protection Bill is a step forward, as the data protection bill is applicable both to companies and government. And the definition of sensitive data and the definition of protection to both sensitive and critical data is much wider, is much broader. Here is another slide on why I feel that this bill is extremely important. Given the huge population India has and the large amount of data that we are generating, every individual generates humongous data, leaves digital footprints behind. So this bill will basically regulate the storage, the processing, and the use of such data. Further, what this bill is doing is that it is paying very special attention to the kind of data, the type of data, more so specifically sensitive personal data, which it classifies further, and we will be discussing it in the upcoming slides. So what is the type of data and what kind of treatment it should get are some things which are addressed in this bill. Next, we move to what is the scope of this bill. So when I talk about the scope of this bill, basically, who does the bill apply to? So this act shall apply to processing of personal data which has been collected, shared, or processed within the territory of India. We have to understand that the scope is both territorial and extraterritorial. Extraterritorial in case, say, you are carrying out an activity in connection with businesses which are carried in India. There are exemptions for that, but we will discuss them a bit later. So if I have to break this down into, 3 simple points about the scope of the bill, that would be the bill governs the processing of personal data, A, for the companies that are incorporated in India, B, for the government, and C, for foreign companies which are dealing with personal data of individuals in India. So that is about the scope of the bill. It shall also apply to processing of personal data by any state, Indian company, or citizen which is incorporated under the Indian law. Let us now move to the classification of data. So the data is classified into 4 major types, okay? The first is the non-personal or the anonymized data. Second, we have personal data, which is of non-sensitive kind. Third, we have sensitive data, which is categorized further into data belonging to children and adults. And fourth, we have critical personal data. Obviously, when we further categorize data into data belonging to children and adults, data belonging to children is much more vulnerable than the one belonging to adults. So it is dealt with differently. While we have talked so much about personal data, what exactly is the definition of personal data? See, personal data in very simple words is any data from which inference can be drawn to identify an individual. You can track an individual's identity from that data. That is personal data. So what the bill does is it further classifies personal data into sensitive personal data and critical personal data. There are 2 major classifications we have to understand. And when we say sensitive personal data, what are the categories under sensitive personal data? We have financial data, there is health data, official identifier like Aadhaar, data related to sex life, sexual orientations, biometric data, genetic data, data related to transgender status or caste, tribe, political, religious affiliations. All these are types of sensitive data. Further, these are not finite. The government under section 15 says that any data which is categorized as sensitive data would be sensitive data per se. Second category is critical personal data. What is critical personal data? It means that any personal data which the government of India, which the central government notifies to be critical personal data, shall be treated as critical personal data. Remember, the treatment of both sensitive personal data and critical personal data are different, and we will soon be dealing with that. Now, I would like to move to what are the major objectives of the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019. What makes this bill a step ahead, right? The first and the foremost is the emphasis on data owners' rights. It is the most important point in the bill that it tries to secure more rights for the owner of the data. The second, the principle of consent. We would soon discuss consent in detail in the upcoming slides. What is consent and why is consent broken? But the objective of this bill is to ensure that consent is clear, is to ensure that consent is provided real time. Third is regarding localization. This was a major concern in the bill. I've read reports of controversies around data localization. So it has to facilitate ease of business, and we will be discussing that also. Before we move ahead, there are three legal definitions that they will keep recurring, and understanding them well will help us understand the regulations. The first is the definition of data principle. Who is a data principle? The natural person to whom the personal data relates to. Notice here that it is saying to whom the personal data relates to, and not to whom the personal data belongs to. There is a difference between the two terms. Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 does not clearly state about the ownership of data. It talks about to whom the personal data relates to. As a matter of fact, it is very similar to its corresponding act in European Union, that is the GDPR, about a data subject. Next, we talk about data fiduciary. Fiduciary is any person, state, company, or any juristic entity which returns and the means of processing of personal data. The data, any person, state, company, or juristic entity who process data, but on the behalf of a data fiduciary, right? So these are the three terms that we need with. Then we move ahead. This slide is data principle. Data principle is the one to whom the data relates to. The cornerstone of this bill is around consent. Consent, I would say, is sure that whenever data must be sought in a specific form and for a lawful purpose. Privacy. It ensures consensus ad idem, which basically in legal of the minds. Mostly consent is broken. I'm sure you would have all of very long, technical, confusing terms, given before you
Ashika.
On apps. Oh, yeah. Yes, Karthik.
Ashika, sorry for interrupting.
Hello.
My voice is breaking.
Okay. All right. Is it better now?
Probably, yes. Let's give it a shot.
Is it better? Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. Carry on, Shika.
Okay. Okay, I'll start the slide again. So in this slide, we are basically talking about the rights of the data principle, right? It enumerates the right of the data principle or to whom the data relates to. See, first we need to understand the idea of consent. Consent is the bedrock of privacy. I hope, Karthik, that the voice is clear now because I still hear some messages.
Clear, ma'am, now. You can continue.
All right, all right. So consent is the cornerstone of the data privacy bill, and it talks about how consent needs to be clear, it needs to be specific, and it needs to be given for a very lawful purpose, right? Mostly what happens is consent is broken when we, like I said, you would have read all those very long, technical, confusing terms which are there and jargons which are shared while you're sharing your data. Most of us don't even bother reading that, right? So it is very important that consent is taken from an informed user and it is granted for a specific time and for a specific purpose. Further in this, further in the rights that are given to the data principal are also rights to confirm and access, wherein the data principal can confirm from the data fiduciary whether his personal data has been collected, in which stage of processing it is, right? The data principal is also given right to correction and eraser. We will be discussing these in detail later. And most importantly, the right to withdrawn consent, which means that you're not giving consent in just one go and then there is no end to it. It is unbundled. You can give consent for a specific time period and you can withdraw it once the purpose of giving such consent is served. You can withdraw such consent. So these are a few rights of the data principal. Next, we move what are the obligations of the data fiduciary, right? The first and foremost obligation of the data fiduciary is to ensure to put in place necessary safeguards for complete, accurate, purposeful processing of personal data. And how does the data fiduciary do so? By ensuring a privacy by design policy. There is a need for the data fiduciary to come up by a privacy policy document and to have such a document certified by a data protection authority. Next, to ensure that there is transparency in data collection, in storage, and in processing. And third, in case a data breach happens, in the unfortunate case where a data breach happens, it informs the data protection authority of such a breach. Of course, there are additional responsibilities to fiduciaries processing data of children, such data being more vulnerable. So data fiduciaries are also further designated into three types, which we'll be discussing in this slide. The first is significant data fiduciary. How is a data fiduciary designated as significant? Based on the volume of data it is processing, based on the sensitivity of the data it is processing, the turnover, the risk that it might lead to in case it's processing, and finally the use of technology and other such relevant factors. So such significant data fiduciaries, what they have to do is that they are expected to take measures like conducting data protection impact assessments if they are dealing with sensitive personal data. Next, we have social media intermediaries. What are social media intermediaries? They are basically organizations which enable online interactions, right? So the bill has a special clause even for social media intermediaries saying that any social media intermediary with a user above a threshold is likely to have significant impact on either electoral democracy or on public order shall be notified as a significant data fiduciary, right? So if they have users above a considerable number that they can impact public order, that they can impact electoral democracy, they will have to adhere with certain regulations. And what are these regulations? We know about those certification verification badges that are there on Twitter, on YouTube, right? Something very similar. There are certain such regulations which social media intermediaries have to adhere to. Third is about consent manager. Consent manager means a data fiduciary which enables a data principal to gain, to withdraw, and review and manage his consent. This, if you know about the principles of account aggregator framework, this is the founding principle of that framework. A consent manager would act like a third party consent broker. It would seek consumers' consent and it would act like a bridge. Just like an account aggregator, it facilitates the movement of financial data, say between financial information user and financial information provider, pretty much on the same lines. We move to the next slide now. So this slide basically talks about, the regulatory requirements for significant data fiduciaries. The two important regulatory requirements, one of them is the appointment of a data protection officer. Every significant data fiduciary has to appoint a data protection officer. This data protection officer is given the task of carrying out data protection impact assessments as well. And it plays a very important role in grievance redressal. So in case a data principal wants to, say, raise a complaint of contravention of provisions of this act, so in case of data fiduciary, they are going to, forward that complaint to a data protection officer. Also, the next is data auditor. A significant data fiduciary will have its policies and, and conducts of its processing of personal data audited annually by an independent data auditor. What does an independent data auditor do? An independent data auditor assigns rating, assigns a data trust score. So if the authority is of the view that data fiduciary is processing in a manner that is likely to cause harm, it may direct that data fiduciary to appoint an independent data auditor. Who is an independent data auditor? Like, how is that person qualified? Well, so the authority shall register. The authority shall register persons with expertise in, say, IT, computer science, data science, privacy, and other such required qualifications as data auditors. It would maintain a, like you could say, a list of such, persons who qualify as data auditors. We will now move forward. Now let's talk about something that is very important. That is the restricting cross-border flow of data. So data transfer restrictions stipulated in this bill are mostly related to the sensitive personal data and the critical personal data. So what are the regulations? That sensitive personal data may be transferred outside India for processing, but it shall continue to be stored in India only. As for critical personal data, it shall only be processed in India and cannot be stored outside the country. But you will be surprised, but this is actually a dilution to the earlier 2018 draft. In the 2018 draft, irrespective of whether it's critical and sensitive, all personal data, a copy of the same had to be stored in India before it's sent outside for processing. However, now it's diluted, and only sensitive data and critical personal data have to follow these regulations. I repeat, for sensitive data, explicit consent is required, permission of the Data Protection Authority, or the permission of the central government, or subject to contractual clauses, it can be processed outside India. But it must also continue to be stored in India. And as for critical personal data, it shall only be processed in India. There are only a few exceptions in which critical personal data can be processed outside the country. And these exceptions are on the lines of health, emergency, or wherever central government or the Data Protection Authority together permit such a transfer. There is an example given here. RBI had much earlier, I think last year, released a notification detailing the storage of payment data systems, advising that all system providers to ensure that data relating to payment systems, fintech data, has to be stored only in India. Right. So while unless other such sectoral notifications come out, the RBI notifications will stand particularly for payment systems data. Are there any exemptions which are granted in data transfer that we just discussed? So yes, pursuant to Section 35 of the bill, the central government can exempt some of its agencies from the applications of this act in interest of security of the state, public order, sovereignty, friendly relations, for journalistic purposes, or for contraventions of prevention, detection, investigations, and contraventions of law, for research purposes, for preventing incitement to cognizable offenses, in case of manual processing by small entities. Right? So these are the exemptions which are granted in data transfer under the section 35 of the bill. Which means that the central government, like I said, can exempt any of its agencies from all applications of this act. Further, personal data of individuals can be processed without their consent in case it is required by the state for welfare, in case it is required for legal proceedings, in case it is required for medical emergency. In such scenario, the central government can process the personal data of individuals without their consent also. Let us now come to grievance redressal mechanism, right? So what does a data principal do in case of violation, or in case it wants to he or she wants to raise a complaint? So grievance can be raised with a data protection officer in case it is a significant data fiduciary. Otherwise, it can be raised with an officer designated if it is the case of other such fiduciaries. Further, if the data principal is aggrieved by any order made by the data protection authority, he can then appeal to an appellate tribunal. Further appeals can be made to the Supreme Court of India. So it goes like this: data protection officer in case of significant data fiduciary, with data protection authority, then with an appellate tribunal, and finally with the Supreme Court of India. So this is regarding the grievance redressal mechanism. We have been talking so much about the data protection authority. So this slide finally enumerates what are the functions of the data protection authority. And believe you me, there are so many. Data protection authority is like an overarching authority. It has multiple functions, and it is going to be across regulators. Its functions range from monitoring and enforcing the applications of this act, specifying the codes of practice, promoting awareness of technological developments, taking prompt action in case a data breach happens, issuing the certificate of registration to data auditors, and renewal, withdrawal, suspension, and cancellation certificates too. Maintaining a database of registered data auditors. Maintaining a database on the website containing name of significant data fiduciaries. So a lot of work, right? And a lot of functions. So you would ask, what is the composition of the Data Protection Authority? Who are these people who get together to form the Data Protection Authority? So majorly the representation is from executive. In the earlier draft, that was the 2018 draft, it had representations from judiciary also, but not so in the 2019 version. In the current version of the bill, a selection committee will be formed, okay? And this selection committee will be formed to select the members of this Data Protection Authority. These members would be selected basis their expertise in the field. And how are the people in the selection committee chosen? The selection committee is going to be chaired by a cabinet secretary level officer. And it will also include representations from Secretary to Government of India, from Ministry of Legal Affairs, and from Ministry of Electronics and IT. So this is the composition of such a selection committee formed for choosing the members of the Data Protection Authority. Now we come to the crux of this presentation. What does the bill mean for individuals, for you and me, for the owner of the data? What does it mean? The first and the foremost thing is that the bill ensures that your data is protected, it's collected, and it's processed very responsibly. That consent is clear, it can be revoked. And further, it empowers data principals and gives them more control of their data at any point of time during the processing of the data and after the processing of the data. In the end of the slide, you can see the rights which are given to individuals, ranging from right to confirmation and access, right to erasure, right to be forgotten. These are two very interesting rights: right to erasure and right to be forgotten. Right to erasure and right to be forgotten are usually used interchangeably, but it is not so. Right to erasure is given under clause 18, which means simple deletion of data, right? For example, say Google, you make a request to Google to delete all data relating to your email. Okay, that is right to erasure. Right to forgotten, on the other end, which is given under clause 20, is a little more complex because it also covers deletion of all information from internet. There was this case in Europe wherein it was first brought up, wherein a person who was bankrupt and a lot of articles were published about him in the electronic media. Even later, when he could pay back all his debts, those articles were still there, and that's when he raised the right to be forgotten. And the court had actually, by that time, asked to remove all those articles which were talking about his bankruptcy, because that was not the case. So in Personal Data Protection Bill, how is it implemented is that you have to make a request to adjudicators for the right to be forgotten. The Personal Data Protection Bill says that the right to be forgotten is to prevent the disclosure of data that no longer serves the purpose for which it was collected. Right? So, though it is a very difficult to implement, because considering the unperishable memory of internet, but these are the two clauses which are also mentioned in the Personal Data Protection Bill. Further, we have the right to data portability and the right to access in one place the identity details of all the data fiduciaries. The right to data portability is, in case you want to move from one data fiduciary to the other, you can do so. That is a right under this bill. Next, we come to what does this bill mean for organizations, right? This law is going to impact all organizations operating in India, with or without their physical presence in the country, provided they are working on personal data of Indian individuals. It will regulate them, right? There are exceptions, however, they are subject to approval to the Data Protection Authority. Under clause 35, the government can exempt any agency from the applicability of law. I have already talked about this before. Under clause 91, it states that the government at any time holds the luxury of accessing your personal or non-personal data. For what? For public and policy purposes. So this is the authority that the government of India has under clause 91 and the clause 35. So how will it impact organizations? Organizations in the same line of thought would need to revamp their security budgets. Teams need to be prepared, would need to invest more in cybersecurity, right? So, I'm continuing with how it's going to impact organizations in this slide also. Companies will need to initiate their planning process. And how they do so, they will have to do so with respect to the scale of their operation, the global or the local consumer reach, the purpose of collection of such data, the sensitivity of data that they are dealing with. So they will have to deal with, consider all these aspects, and then they would have to plan. First, they will have to update their consent mechanism, right? They will have to make it more clear, more updated. Second, they would have to classify the data they collect. Once they classify the data into personal, into sensitive, into critical, only then they would be able to understand the treatment of that data as such. Third, they would have to enhance the data security measures. Because remember, the penalties in this bill are not just for not complying with the provisions of the Act, but they are also so if the cybersecurity guidelines are not adhered to. Organizations will also have to conduct regular privacy readiness assessments and develop a culture of privacy per se. It's important that they have a crisis communication plan in place so that in case there is a data breach, they are very well aware who do they need to inform, and then what is the timeline of sharing such information, whether they need to reach out to Data Protection Authority, later they have to inform certain. So they need to have such crisis communication plans in place. Finally, they need to review existing contracts, right, with third party actors, and they need to make sure that they are also following the guidelines of protecting data at every stage of its processing. So these two slides were about what the bill is going to imply for organizations. Now we come to the penalties and fines, right? So most of the penalties and fines in this bill are, very similar to what is in the general data protection regulations given by European Union. So penalties for the violation of the bill might extend to a maximum of 15 crore or 4% of the global turnover for the preceding year. And this is for the violation of the regulations which are given in the bill. Remember, fine and penalty can also be imposed in case cybersecurity guidelines are not adhered to. And in such case, the amount can be around 5 crores or 2% of the turnover, whichever is higher. Another section, an aggrieved data principal is also entitled to recover compensation from a data fiduciary or a data processor if he feels that his personal data, sensitive or critical, was exposed negligently. He's entitled to recover compensation. Now we talk about privacy laws around the world. Why we need to talk about this is because we need to understand in our journey of privacy vis-a-vis international laws, where is India? So see, in United States, the privacy law doesn't exist at a federal level. Okay, it is basically, I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but the Californian privacy law is supposed to be most stringent law. So it is distributed among public and private sector. Its emphasis is very unequally distributed. Further, the first set of principles which ensured that data processing was done transparently and adhering to the principles of privacy and security were the fair information practices, FIPs as they were known. They were the first set of principles that ensured information was handled responsibly. Post that, there was the FCRA Act, which was the first US legislation that addressed the issue of protecting personal data in computerized databases. So this is about the privacy law in US. Next, we come to the privacy laws in European Union. The European Union privacy law, that is the General Data Protection Regulations, GDPR, as they are famously known as. They are supposed to be the gold standard worldwide. They replaced the Data Protection Directive of 1995. The Data Protection Directive of 1995 had around 28 states and allowed them to customize laws as per the needs of their citizens. But it was the GDPR that harmonized and standardized data privacy laws. See, there are multiple data privacy laws, okay? There are many states which are adopting even individual data privacy laws like Germany, Switzerland. So multiplicity of such laws does make the compliance a bit difficult. There is a need for harmonization of laws for the ease of business. In this slide, I talk about the various penalties and fines which have been imposed under GDPR. So there are two levels of fines which GDPR imposes. The tune of 2 to 4% of the worldwide annual revenue. The lower level is up to pounds 10 million and the higher up to 20 million. In this slide, I talk about the top 5 biggest GDPR fines. It talks about players like Google and Tim, which have been fined heavily for violating and not adhering to the GDPR regulations. We have also read in news about British Airways, right, which was fined to the tune of almost 183 million pounds, and Marriott and many others. So GDPR is very stringent when it comes to regulating data privacy and is recognized as, like I said, the gold standard. So what exactly is the key difference between GDPR and the Personal Data Protection Bill? Well, quite frankly, that the scope of Personal Data Protection Bill is much wider than GDPR. Why? Because entity might fall within the scope merely by processing personal data in India. For example, we know India is an outsourcing hub, right? So the data that they are processing in India might belong to foreign nationals, but it would still fall in the scope of Personal Data Protection Bill. Though the government can exercise its authority to exempt such processing authorities, such processing activities, I'm sorry, but it has to be done on a case-to-case basis. Second is that the definition of sensitive personal data is much broader in the Personal Data Protection Bill. GDPR has a very finite definition of what consists sensitive personal data, whereas the Personal Data Protection Bill allows the government to define additional categories of sensitive data under Section 15. Hence, it has a much more broader definition of what consists as sensitive personal data. GDPR uses the term data subject, whereas Personal Data Protection Bill uses the term data principal. Though functionally they are pretty much they are same, but there is difference in terminology. That's all. Personal Data Protection Bill also has some additional regulations like the appointment of a data auditor, like certain data localization requirements which are not there in GDPR. Most importantly, the Personal Data Protection Bill extends criminal liability position. There can be offenses which are non-bailable. The General Data Protection Regulations, they do not criminally sanction under GDPR. There are also further regulations about making verified accounts mandatory for social media service providers, and these are not there in any of the GDPR regulations. Another important point is regarding the age, right? So age threshold is much higher, for GDPR. In India, even a child under 18, even a person under 18 is considered a child. Whereas in the GDPR, that age limit is 16. So there are these minor differences, but more or less, the Personal Data Protection Bill is in many way, overlapping with the GDPR and trying to set a set of regulations which are stringent, which will ensure that data is protected and users' data remains safe. So that's it. Thank you so much. I think what I have tried to do with this presentation is that I have introduced you to the concept of privacy, to how the question of privacy was raised in the Indian courts, and how the Personal Data Protection Bill came into being. I've also introduced the various regulations as under the acts, the legal terminologies, and what will be the implications of such regulations on both individuals and organizations. And the idea was to introduce you to various international laws and see that where we are in our privacy journey, and we still have miles to go, but it's definitely a start. So one interesting question that I thought I will lead you to wonder about, we keep listening to that data is the new oil, data is the new oil, but it's a cliche. Whereas what we need to think about is data the new water. Why? Because just like water, they say that the next world war is going to be about water. Data also is as important and as crucial, right, for a country's growth. And apart from that, just like water, data needs to keep flowing. Roll it. It's difficult to keep it in one place. So that's food for thought. This I will finish my presentation, and now I'm looking forward to the question and answers round, to any questions that you might have, and we can discuss the same. Thank you so much. Hope this was, you found knowledge in this presentation. Thank you.
So Shikha, I see there are a lot of questions that come up in the chat window. Maybe you can go through them
Right.
one by one.
Right. Questions only. I'm scrolling up. I see a long list of questions.
Yes.
Okay, so I see this question that if critical data is if critical data is anonymized, can the anonymized data be shared ahead? So yeah, see, data anonymization basically means that there is destruction, all identifiable data. So the personal data protection bill doesn't really, anonymize data. Apart from, apart from say the section, uh, I think section 91, which gives the government authority to share both anonymized and personal and non-personal data without consent. So apart from that, personal data protection bill does not talk about anonymized data. It does talk about pseudonymization of data. Since pseudonymization is a reversible process, so it does cover pseudonymized data but not anonymized data. Uh, Does an individual, okay, I'm starting from below now. Does an individual receive consent compensation to know that his or her data has been compromised? This is Arijit. If the bill becomes a law, and if an individual gets to know that their data has been compromised, they can definitely, in case of a significant data, they can approach the data protection officer and they can get compensation in tune to their damages. This was a question by Arjit. There is a question by Kashish. How the fundamental right of citizen be secured if data is kept with some data fiduciary? Can a citizen approach court in case of breach? Yes, Kashish, a citizen can approach court in case of breach. Uh, see, of course, it is a fundamental right. Okay, right to privacy is a fundamental right, but right to privacy is not an absolute right. It is subject to certain tests and reasonable restrictions, right? And these can be overridden by competing state and individual interest. These interests could be national security, investigating crime, social welfare. So it is still a fundamental right. And yes, like I said, there is a whole grievance mechanism in which you can approach the data protection officer, then the data protection authority. If you're not happy with the data protection authority, there is appellate tribunal, and if not so, then you can approach the Supreme Court. So that was your question, Kashish. I hope I answered it. Then does the actually this chat is scrolling up every time I try to read a question. Okay. Okay. Vasant asks, does the Data Protection Authority has budget and power to invest, spend on awareness campaign and data privacy protection? Vasant, see, Data Protection Authority has a lot of functions. It is an overarching authority, and I would say rather I'm overburdened one. But I'm sure that as this bill is passed and it becomes a law, there will be we will see succeeding judgments on how it can be implemented better, and then we would understand what the budget looks like. And it definitely has the power. How much budget it has will soon come up. Once the bill is finalized and other judgments regarding the powers are more clearly mentioned. So far there is no mention about the budget. It definitely has the power. Yes. Then Amat asks how cloud security helps in securing cyber attacks. This is a cyber security question, Karthik. Maybe you would like to take this up. How cloud security helps in securing cyber attacks?
So cloud security is just another security control. Premise. If the data is stored in the cloud, you need to ensure the security of the data in the cloud, and to ensure that the cloud service provider would have his share of responsibilities. But again, if you are the consumer of the cloud service, you also have your share of responsibility. Right? So both of these together, you need to ensure that the data is secure. Now, as the data fiduciary,
Karthik, I think we've lost your audio.
okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Now we can hear you.
Stop hearing me at some point.
Yeah. Now it's audible, Karthik. Go ahead.
The cloud security is one of the aspects of security control, right? If your data is in the cloud, the security cloud service provider as well as you as the cloud consumer, right? But as a data fiduciary, the responsibility still is primarily with the data fiduciary, right? You are still responsible primarily for ensuring security control, and the contract that you are going to have with the cloud service provider needs to take that into account as well.
Right. Rashika is asking, what is the example of critical data? Rashika, frankly, I mean, according to the Act, if I go strictly speaking, according to the Act, the only definition of critical data is that the data which is classified as critical data by the government of India. My examples would only be guesses, but there are no specific examples in the Act which say as what could be classified as critical data. But this is the category of data that is most sensitive. So I'm assuming a lot of financial data related to payments would also be maybe one example of critical data. So yes. uh, Again, we have a question from Sritesh. What is the criteria for an organization to be classified as significant data fiduciary? Thank you for the question, Sritesh. Sritesh, an organization can be classified as a significant data fiduciary on multiple accounts, on the volume of data they are processing, on the type of data. If they are processing extremely sensitive data, then it can also be classified as significant data fiduciary. And on the number of you could say data users that they have. So there are multiple counts on which it can be classified as a significant data fiduciary. uh, Bijay Pal asks, ma'am, how the data can be said secure if anybody like data protection officer has the authority to check the data? Even he can sell the data, or even he can use it for some fraud. Right. So how does the company which is storing data know which type of data? They must look into it, and that's how our privacy is not concerned. Right, Vijay, I think your concerns are rising from C exceptions, and in case the data protection officer is corrupted, or these are exception scenarios, and I think policy making would not really take such erroneous exceptions to create a draft. So I mean, it is in good faith that we are assuming that officers, data protection officers, and data auditors would be doing their job in good faith. Vasant asks, has the personal data protection bill clearly defined what is critical data? Is the law clear on what is critical data? How can one classify critical data? Vasant, like I said, the only definition of critical data is that what has been defined, what is defined and what is classified by the central government as critical data. They have not given any examples. There is definitely not much apart from this definition of critical data. And I think once this bill becomes a law, we will definitely see more such more you could say more explanations and on such more deliberations on what actually comprises critical data. So I hope that answers your question. But in short, yes, there is a lot of ambiguity, and it is completely on the central government to classify data as critical. Okay, so Sritesh asked the question, what are the similarities or difference between personal data protection in Singapore, European Union, Malaysia, Australia, Canada? Sritesh, I have already covered the General Data Protection Bill, and there are a lot of overlaps and similarities, like I said, and there are differences as well, which was in my last slide. I could revisit the slide if you want. Apart from that, Singapore, Australia, Canada, all of them have different data protection laws. I feel that we can return to this later because multiple laws means there are multiple compliances and there are not necessarily a lot of similarities. Karthik, would you be able to answer this question better regarding differences in privacy in Singapore, especially, or Australia or Canada?
No, I think you are right, Shika. So, there will be some nuances which will be different, but by and large, I think the message to us security professionals is very clear, right? That we need to up our game. We need to ensure protection of personal data. And this is the key message from whatever you take, right? Because in whatever regulation you're talking about, all of them do mandate that we take all possible precautions when we are handling personal data.
Absolutely.
And if there were to be a breach of personal data, there would be significant penalties, that will be levied if it is found that the breach is because of any lax security practices. So that is the and that is common to all regulations.
Right, Karthik. I think that explains it very well. Then Kirti asked a question, address will come under which category? Sensitive personal data or critical sensitive personal data? Kirti, like I said, so far critical sensitive personal data has only been defined as whatever is classified as critical personal data by the government of India. So address will definitely be sensitive personal data. Official identifier, for example, is sensitive personal data, which includes your address details as well, right? So it is sensitive personal data. Once we withdraw our consent, how do we come to know that processor or data collector has deleted our data? There is something called right to confirmation and access. You can get a summary of all the action that has been done on your data. So this right will help you understand what has been done with your, in what processing has been done or whether it has been deleted or not. Could you explain transferring data is different from data processing, and how can we make sure privacy is maintained in data transfer? Okay. Kirti, when I talk about transferring data, when I'm talking about data transfer, I'm basically talking about data transfer to it being processed outside India. Okay. And there are certain restrictions in data transfer, which I had explained in my slides, which are there specifically for sensitive data and for critical data. For sensitive data, it can be processed outside India, but there are certain conditions, but it has to be explicit consent has to be given by the data principal. Data protection authority has to permit for the same, or the central government has to permit for the same. Also, an important point is it must continue to be stored in India as well. Okay, so this is for data transfer of sensitive data. For critical personal data, it cannot be processed outside India. The rare exceptions in this case could only be related to health and emergency, or in case central government and the data protection authority, both of them permit such a transfer. So yeah, this is regarding your data transfer point. The last question that you've asked is, do we consider metadata and registers as well in data eraser and data forgotten? I'm not able to understand this question. Do we consider metadata and registers as well in data eraser and data forgotten. I will move to the next question. Who will be responsible in case of data breach, organization or individual? Yeah, so in case of a data breach, obviously the organization, is responsible, but the report of such a breach has to be done. You've written Data Protection Authority here, I'm assuming DPO. So the report of such breach has to be, the complaint has to be raised with the Data Protection Authority, provided it is a significant data fiduciary. In other data fiduciaries, with any adjudicating officer as has been designated. So yeah. Then we move to am I missing any question? What happens to Ankuras? What happens to data if a person dies? Can anyone from his or her family invoke consent? Ankur, there are no clear guidelines about this so far. It is definitely not a part of the Personal Data Protection Bill. So I would not be able to clarify that doubt. I'm sure guidelines on this would come sooner once this bill becomes a law. Yeah. Okay. Then this question again by Kirti, what is the difference between data privacy and data protection? Kirti, when we talk about data protection, we are basically, safeguarding our data from any access that we don't want to. When we're talking about data privacy, it's more like whom do we want to share our data with. It is thought to be a consent wherein we should have control over our data, wherein we should know who is gaining control of our data, how is it being processed. So that is that slight difference between data protection. Data protection is much broader. It is about general guidelines of protecting your data from any unlawful access. You protect your data even from hackers, right? Data privacy is who would you like to share your data with, in very simple terms. I hope it you got clear. Bill says Vasanta's processing of data in a fair and reasonable manner. Are there any guidelines for this? No, not actually. There are no guidelines on this. This is a very ambiguous term, in a fair and reasonable manner. But when they say fair and reasonable manner, Vasant, they usually mean in a very transparent way, wherein the data principal has complete control over his data being processed. So, and consent is given by an informed user. Consent is given that is clear, and that can be revoked at any time. So these are the usual guidelines for transparency and fairness when it comes to data processing. But most of these guidelines have to do with you could say consent, have to do with ensuring that all the rights of the data principal are safeguarded. That's pretty much about fair and reasonable. Okay, I will scroll up now, and Ajit asked, do critical personal data be stored in international servers, or is it just it can be processed by international companies? No, Arjit. Critical personal data cannot be processed outside India at all. That is what the Personal Data Protection Bill says. And there are only a few exceptions in which such a thing can happen. That is, exceptions related to health, related to emergency, and wherein the central government and the Data Protection Authority permit, that such a transfer happens. Otherwise, it cannot be stored in international servers. It has to be stored in India itself. I hope that answers, Ajit. Also, Ajit asked, does bill amend the Information Technology Act 2000 to delete the provisions related to compensation payable by companies for failure to protect personal data? Yes, definitely. This bill is going to replace the Information Technology Act, and if there are any contradictory or opposing, provisions related to compensation, then this bill, if it becomes a law, will overrule such provisions. Okay, Vasant also says that from the draft bill, it is not clear. Conditions for storage of copy of data within the territory of India for critical data. The definitions for serving copy and critical personal data are not provided. These are to be defined clearly. Is it taught? I agree, Vasant. There are a lot of nuances which need to be further defined, and this will definitely happen once it becomes a law. Uh, as per your concern, conditions for storage of copy of data within the territory of India for critical data is not clear. No, see, critical data copy. This question is in a way not correct, Vasant, because critical data is not allowed to be transferred, right? Except in exceptional cases like of health emergency and where the central government and the data protection authority allow. Otherwise, it's not allowed. So the storage of copy, I think you wanted to write sensitive data. Those conditions, yes, those conditions, they need to be further defined and clearly defined. Yes, I hope that answers. Okay, I think most of the questions I have answered. Are there any more questions? Please share them in the chat window. Please share it in the chat window. Is there any documentation available on personal data protection? Yeah, so of course, the bill, the 2019 bill is available online. Karthik, if you allow me, can I share my publication on the chat window? My paper on the personal data protection bill.
Yeah, Shiva, please.
Okay, so this is an analysis that I had done of the personal data protection bill. You might find it, easier to read than the original, bill, because that tends to get very heavy and very heavy on legal terms as well. So I'm sharing that documentation here, Sritesh. Hope that helps you. Robin is asking. Robin is asking, how is data privacy differs from cybersecurity? That's a very interesting question, Robin. Karthik, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think cybersecurity is like overarching term, right? Data privacy should be a subset of cybersecurity, right?
Yeah, there is overlap, but I will not call it a subset because data privacy goes beyond security as well, right?
Okay.
You need to have strong security to ensure privacy, but you also need a lot more than just security to ensure privacy, right? And going back to what Shikha was explaining earlier in terms of what are the implications to organizations once this bill becomes done, right? One goes without saying that you need to have a strong cybersecurity control, right? If your cybersecurity controls are found to be lax, you are liable to be penalized. And in India, as per the Indian Act, it can even be, it's actually a criminal offense, right? So it's not just a penalty, it can also be a jail term. So that's the unique thing about the Indian Act compared to GDPR or even the acts of other countries. Now, privacy is not just security, but right. So you need to ensure that you have processes in place to ensure privacy. On your web applications, when you are collecting data, you have the right process to obtain consent. You have the right back-to-back contract with all your vendors who will be accessing this data, right? They are your data processors. So the contracts that you have with these vendors need to ensure that they are also taking this seriously. So privacy is a lot more, than just ensuring security. And also a lot of times, security and privacy can be in conflict as well, right? And that is why one of the good models to have for an organization is to have a separate team responsible for privacy, and not the security team, right? Because a lot of times, security team would want to have access to a lot more data and what is desirable, and hence the privacy team will then make sure that even the security team has access to only that amount of data as what is required.
Right,
so,
right.
Privacy and security kind of becomes two separate or teams within an organization.
Right, right. Thanks, Karthik. That does make sense.
So I think Robin just put a follow-up question.
Yes.
If the organization is handling PII, will the organization be required to follow any cybersecurity standard? So the answer is no. I don't think any of these acts, whether the Indian Act or any of the other acts, mention any specific standard to be followed, and that is probably appropriate because at the end of it, you are responsible for ensuring security, whether you following NIST standards, or you follow PCI DSS standards, or you follow SOC 2 standards. Irrespective of what the standards are, the responsibility is with you, and hence the Act does not provide any such standards defined.
Right, right. Vasant writes, there are a lot of ambiguities in the bill. Yes, Vasant, in the present bill, there are ambiguities, but I feel that once it becomes a law, there will be many follow-up, discourses and deliberations and reports. Already, we have a report that is being currently considered about regulation of non-personal data also. So it's going to take time for more clearer regulations to come up, but uh, yeah, in the present form, there are certain ambiguities.
Yeah. చెప్పు
I think I'm not very aware, but I think when Nilay is talking about law like HIPAA, is talking about health insurance portability, which is a sectoral regulation. Uh, Maybe later, Nilay, like I said, currently sectoral regulations are not out. For example, even RBI had shared regulations regarding storage of payment data, which is much earlier, and it has not come up with any regulation, that updates it as according to the Personal Data Protection Bill. So sectoral regulations will come, I think, after the this bill becomes a law. So yeah. Dinesh asks whether data protection bill falls under civil, criminal, or both. Yes, Vinesh, under there are certain penalties in data protection bill which are non-bailable. and can lead to criminal sanction also. So yes, that's your answer. Yeah, I think. Are there any other questions? Should we share the assessment link?
Yeah, I don't see any more questions coming up. So yeah, I think we can close the webinar and go towards assessment. Thanks a lot, Shika. It was a very interesting webinar, and I think it's very timely as well because the bill is going to become an act pretty soon. It is expected that in the monsoon session of the Parliament, this bill will be tabled. And I'm sure that the law will give some time for the organizations to become compliant to this. But this bill is going to is going to increase the responsibilities on cybersecurity professionals much more. So the clarifications you have given, the information provided is very timely.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karthik, for giving me this opportunity, and I'm hopeful that this discussion was as enriching for the participants as it was for me. So thank you so much.
Actually, it is not a class, it's a webinar. If I attend this, I will